The great chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as Dr. Sarah Chen stepped forward. Her boots echoed against the crystalline floor, each step measured and calm. Above her, representatives from 47 different species watched from their elevated platforms. Their eyes, some single, some multiple, some that saw beyond visible light, all fixed on the human woman in the center. Sarah wore a simple gray uniform. No medals decorated her chest, though she had earned many. No weapons hung at her side, though she had survived 3 years of brutal conflict. She carried only one thing, a small medical bag, worn and stained from countless emergencies. Dr. Sarah Chen, the council speaker announced, his 4 arms gesturing formally. You stand accused of war crimes committed during the Kralix-human border conflict. How do you answer these charges? Before Sarah could respond, the Kralix prosecutor rose from his platform. Zorkath was tall and imposing, his scaled skin gleaming like polished bronze. His voice boomed through the chamber. This human performed unauthorized experiments on our wounded soldiers, Zorkath declared. She violated the Galactic Convention on Medical Ethics. She caused suffering to defenseless prisoners. The evidence is clear. Her medical records show procedures that no certified doctor would attempt. Murmurs rippled through the council. Sarah remained still, her dark eyes calm. The holographic display activated, showing blurred images of a field hospital. Kralix soldiers lay on medical beds, while a human figure moved between them. The footage was grainy, damaged by war. These records are incomplete, Zorkath continued. Convenient, is it not? The parts that would prove her guilt are mysteriously missing. What was she hiding? What did she do to our people? In the darkness of that war. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she said nothing yet. The council speaker turned to her. Dr. Chen, do you deny treating Kralix prisoners during the conflict? No, Sarah replied simply. I treated everyone who needed help. Everyone? Zorkath laughed harshly. You expect us to believe a human showed mercy to her enemies? During a war where both sides fought desperately for survival? Sarah met his gaze steadily. I'm a doctor. I took an oath to heal, not to judge who deserves healing. Another council member, a floating jellyfish-like being named Counselor Mist, spoke in a gentle tone. Dr. Chen, please help us understand. The records show you performed surgical procedures on Kralix physiology. Your training was in human medicine. How did you know what to do? I learned, Sarah answered. When wounded Kralix soldiers arrived at my field hospital, I had 2 choices. Let them die, or figure out how to save them. I chose to save them. Unauthorized experimentation, Zorkath shouted. She admits it herself. I admit I had to improvise, Sarah said calmly. War doesn't wait for proper certifications. When someone is bleeding out in front of you, you don't check if you have permission to help them. You just help. The holographic display changed, showing medical equipment covered in both red human blood and green Kralix blood. The mixture looked like a terrible painting. Your hospital treated both species? Counselor Mist asked. My hospital treated anyone who came through our doors, Sarah confirmed. Human, Kralix, even the Vex traders who got caught in crossfire. We turned no one away. Zorkath's scales darkened with anger. Lies. We have testimony that human soldiers executed wounded Kralix prisoners. Your own people are war criminals. Some humans did terrible things during the war, Sarah acknowledged, her voice heavy. Just as some Kralix did. War brings out the worst in every species, but it can also bring out the best. I chose to be the best version of humanity I could be. Noble words, Zorkath sneered. But words mean nothing. The council must see justice done. This human should spend the rest of her life in a prison colony, away from civilized species. The council members whispered among themselves. Sarah could see doubt in many eyes. The missing records made her look guilty. The improvised procedures looked like experiments. Without complete evidence, how could she prove her innocence? The council speaker raised his primary hand for silence. Dr. Chen, you understand the severity of these charges? If found guilty, you will be removed from all medical registries across the galaxy. You will never practice medicine again. And yes, imprisonment is likely. Sarah took a slow breath. 3 years of war. Hundreds of lives saved. Countless hours working until her hands shook with exhaustion. All of it reduced to this moment. Standing accused in front of the galaxy. She straightened her shoulders and spoke clearly. Council members, Prosecutor Zorkath has called me a war criminal. He suggests I caused suffering and performed cruel experiments. Her voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. I want to make one thing very clear. If you enhafted, 2H matter. The chamber grew absolutely silent. If I were truly a war criminal, Sarah continued, if I had the capacity for cruelty that he describes, if I wanted to cause harm rather than prevent it. She paused, letting her words sink in. Then none of you would be here today. I had opportunities. I had access. I had wounded enemies completely. At my mercy. She looked directly at Zorkath. If I were a war criminal, you'd already be dead. All of you would. But you're not. You're alive. And many of you are alive because of doctors like me, who chose healing over hatred. A gasp echoed from somewhere in the audience gallery. A young Kralix in civilian clothes had stood up, his scales pale with shock. I know her, the young Kralix said, his voice trembling. I know that human. She saved my life. Every eye in the council chamber turned toward him. The council speaker gestured for silence as confusion filled the chamber. The young Kralix stood trembling in the gallery, his scales shifting between pale fear and determined bronze. State your name and purpose, the speaker commanded. My name is Velthor, son of the merchant clan Velmara, the young Kralix replied. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. I was a soldier during the border conflict, and that human woman saved my life when her own people wanted to leave me to die. Zorkath's scales darkened. This is irregular. The prosecution does not recognize this witness. The council recognizes all who speak truth, Counselor Mist said gently. Continue, young Velthor. Velthor climbed down from the gallery to the main floor. He walked slowly, as if remembering pain. 3 years ago, I was part of a patrol near the disputed sector. We encountered a human squad. There was a fight. Sarah watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. I was hit, Velthor continued. Shrapnel. From an explosive device. My squad retreated, but I couldn't move. I thought I would die there, alone in the mud. His voice cracked slightly. Then the humans found me. The holographic display shifted, showing a different set of images. These were personal recordings from Velthor's own memory device, recovered from his armor. The council watched as human soldiers approached the wounded Kralix. Most of them wanted to leave me, Velthor said quietly. The hologram showed Sarah pushing through the human soldiers, her medical bag already open. Her uniform was covered in mud and blood from previous patients. She knelt beside me, Velthor recalled. She didn't speak my language then, but she didn't need to. She looked at my wounds and immediately started working. The other humans argued with her. They said helping me was dangerous, that more Kralix soldiers might come. In the hologram, Sarah's hands moved quickly and efficiently. She cut away damaged armor, applied pressure to bleeding wounds, injected something that made Velthor's pain ease. She told them to guard the perimeter if they were worried, Velthor said. Then she went back to saving me. She worked for 2 hours straight, keeping me alive while explosions happened nearby. When evacuation finally came, she insisted I be taken with the human wounded. Counselor Mist leaned forward. What happened after the evacuation? I woke up 3 days later in her field hospital, Velthor answered. The most remarkable thing I had ever seen. Humans and Kralliks lay side by side on medical beds. Dr. Chen moved between all of them, treating everyone equally. She had no bias, no hatred, only determination to save lives. Zorkath stood abruptly. One story does not prove innocence. Perhaps she saved this one soldier for propaganda purposes. Then explain the others. Velthor shot back, his scales flushed with anger. After I recovered enough to walk, I counted 47 Krallik soldiers in that hospital. 47 of my people receiving treatment from human doctors and nurses. Dr. Chen had trained her entire staff to help anyone who needed it. More murmurs filled the chamber. Sarah remained quiet, letting Velthor speak. I watched her work, Velthor continued. She would go 70, 80 hours without sleep. Other humans would beg her to rest, but she refused while patients still needed care. She learned our anatomy by studying wounded soldiers, asking permission first, taking careful notes. She made mistakes. Sometimes our biology is different from yours, but she learned from each one. The council speaker addressed Sarah directly. Is this testimony accurate? Yes, Sarah replied. I had no formal training in Kralliks medicine. I had to learn through practice. Every procedure was documented in my medical logs. Every patient gave consent when they were able to. I saved who I could save. And those you couldn't save? Zorkath demanded. Sarah's expression darkened with old pain. I remember every single one. Their names, their faces, the exact time they died despite everything I tried. 17 Krallik soldiers, 31 human soldiers, 5 Vex traders, 2 diplomats from species I'd never even met before. I carry them all with me. The chamber fell silent at the raw honesty in her voice. Velthor pulled out a data chip. I have something else to show the council. After Dr. Chen was accused, I started investigating. I wanted to know why someone would falsely charge the doctor who saved so many lives. He inserted the chip into the holographic system. New data appeared, medical records, complete and detailed. Every procedure Sarah had performed, every patient she had treated, every innovation she had developed to treat multiple species. These are the complete records from her hospital, Velthor announced. The ones that were supposedly lost. Zorkath's scales went completely dark. Where did you get those? From the Kralliks military database, Velthor replied coldly. They weren't lost. They were deliberately deleted from the public files submitted to this council. Someone didn't want you to see the full truth. Counselor Mist's form rippled with concern. Who had access to delete such records? Velthor turned to face Zorkath. Only high-ranking military commanders from the war. I traced the deletion codes. They lead directly to someone in this very chamber. The accusation hung in the air like electricity before a storm. These are serious allegations, the council speaker said slowly. Young Velthor, you claim the prosecutor himself deleted evidence? I claim that someone with his access codes did, Velthor corrected carefully. Whether he personally did it or someone under his command, I cannot prove yet. But I do know this. Prosecutor Zorkath was a military commander during the border conflict. He had authority over multiple sectors. Does Y and Kas. Zorkath's voice turned dangerous. I was a soldier. Yes. I fought to defend my people. That does not make me a criminal. No, Sarah said quietly, speaking for the first time in minutes. But destroying evidence to frame an innocent person does. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted questions in dozens of languages. Security officers moved toward the platforms, unsure who they should protect or detain. Through it all, Sarah stood perfectly still, watching Zorkath with calm, knowing eyes. Order! the council speaker demanded, his forearms raised high. We will have order. Slowly, the noise subsided. Zorkath remained standing, his bronze scales now mottled with dark patches of stress. His clawed hands gripped the edge of his platform. These accusations are absurd, Zorkath declared. I am the prosecutor here. I brought charges against this human because evidence suggested her guilt. Nothing more. One. Then you won't mind if we examine your military record? Counselor Mist suggested gently. For completeness. Before Zorkath could respond, another voice called out from the gallery. An older human man in military uniform stood up. His face was weathered with age and experience. I have testimony to provide, the man announced. Colonel James Morrison, Human Defense Forces, retired. The council speaker nodded. Approach and speak, Colonel. Morrison walked down to stand beside Sarah. He gave her a respectful nod before addressing the council. I commanded the sector where Dr. Chen's field hospital operated. I can confirm everything, Velthor said. Dr. Chen treated enemy soldiers against direct orders from some of my officers. Against orders? A council member asked, surprised. Some of my soldiers thought it was foolish to help the enemy, Morrison admitted, his voice heavy with regret. They wanted her to focus only on human casualties. Dr. Chen refused. She said her oath was to all living beings, not just humans. She said healing wasn't about taking sides. He pulled out his own data device. I have logs from multiple incidents. Once, a group of injured Kralix soldiers surrendered near our position. Some of my men wanted to take them prisoner and leave them wounded. Dr. Chen physically stepped between my soldiers and the prisoners. She told us that if we harmed defenseless wounded beings, we were no better than the worst war criminals in history. Sarah's expression softened slightly at the memory. What did you do? The council speaker asked. I backed her up, Morrison said firmly. Because she was right. We let her treat the Kralix prisoners. Half of them survived because of her skill. And you know what happened? 2 months later, when our position was overrun and I was wounded, those same Kralix soldiers convinced their commanders to let human medics treat me. Dr. Chen's compassion created a ripple effect. More witnesses came forward. A Kralix nurse, who had worked alongside Sarah. A human soldier, who had watched her refuse evacuation to stay with patients. A Vex trader who had seen her hospital welcome anyone who needed help. Each testimony painted the same picture. A doctor who saw no enemies, only patients. A human who worked miracles with limited supplies and unlimited dedication. Velthor approached the holographic display again. There's more. I continued my investigation into the deleted records. I found something else in the military archives. New images appeared. Battle maps. Communications. Logs. Orders stamped with military authorization codes. During the 3rd year of the war, Velthor explained, his voice shaking with controlled anger, someone ordered strikes on medical facilities. 3 hospitals were destroyed. 1 human, 2 Kralix. Hundreds of wounded soldiers and medical staff died in those attacks. The council chamber went deathly quiet. The Galactic Convention clearly forbids attacking medical facilities, Counselor Mist said, her voice filled with sorrow. Those strikes were war crimes. Yes, Velthor agreed. And I found the authorization codes for those orders. They came from the same military access level that deleted Dr. Chen's complete medical records. All eyes turned to Zorkath. The prosecutor's scales had gone completely pale. You're suggesting I ordered those strikes? Zorkath said, his voice dangerous and low. Based on access codes? Hundreds of commanders had similar access. True, Velthor acknowledged. But I did more research. I contacted survivors from those hospital attacks. I asked them what they remembered. He activated another recording. An elderly Krolix woman appeared in the hologram, her scales scarred and faded. "I was a nurse at the Western Medical Facility," the woman said in the recording. "The day before the attack, we received an unusual communication. A military commander demanded we transfer all enemy prisoners to a detention facility. We refused, they were too injured to move. The commander said we would regret that decision." "Did you see this commander?" Velthor asked in the recording. "Yes. His name was Zorkath. He was younger then, but I never forget a face. His scales had that distinctive pattern near his eyes." The hologram zoomed to show Zorkath's face, then split to show a younger version from military records. The scale pattern matched perfectly. Zorkath stepped back from his platform edge. "That proves nothing. I may have sent that communication, but I didn't order the strikes. I was trying to protect the prisoners by moving them." "Then why did the strikes happen exactly 12 hours after your visit?" Velthor demanded. "Why were 3 different hospitals attacked on the same day, all after receiving similar communications from you?" Colonel Morrison spoke up again. "I remember those attacks. Our intelligence suggested they were meant to eliminate wounded enemy soldiers before they could return to battle. Someone calculated that it was more efficient to destroy them while they were helpless than to face them again as healed soldiers." "That's a lie," Zorkath roared. His composure finally cracked completely. "You humans are twisting facts to protect your war criminal. This entire proceeding is a farce." "Then submit your complete military records for review," the council speaker said calmly. "If you have nothing to hide, prove your innocence, as Dr. Chen has done." Zorkath looked around the chamber. Every face watched him with suspicion now. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. His scales shifted through colors rapidly, a Krolix sign of extreme stress. Suddenly, Zorkath bolted. He leaped from his platform and ran toward the chamber exit. "Security!" the council speaker shouted. Guards moved to intercept. But Zorkath was fast. He crashed through a side door and disappeared into the corridor beyond. Alarms began blaring throughout the council building. Sarah finally moved. She walked calmly to where Zorkath had stood and looked at the documents he'd left behind in his panic. "He left his personal data tablet," she observed quietly. "How careless." Security forces brought Zorkath back to the council chamber 3 hours later. His hands were bound with energy restraints that glowed softly in the dim light. His scales had lost their shine, appearing dull and gray with defeat. Gone was the proud prosecutor who had accused Sarah. Now he looked like what he truly was, a frightened person caught in his own lies. The council speaker's voice was cold and formal. "Zorkath, former commander of the Krolix 3rd Division, you are now the one facing charges. Do you understand?" Zorkath said nothing. He stared at the floor. "We have examined your personal data tablet," Counselor Mist said gently, though sadness filled her voice. "It contains evidence of the orders you gave during the war. Orders to strike medical facilities. Orders to falsify reports. Orders to delete Dr. Chen's complete medical records. I have a 9. Weak in 64. And in 7th." More council members spoke, listing the evidence. Communication logs. Authorization codes. Witness testimonies. Each piece added to the weight of Zorkath's guilt. Finally, the council speaker turned to Sarah. "Dr. Chen, you have been completely cleared of all charges. We apologize for this terrible injustice. You are free to go with the council's gratitude and respect." Sarah nodded slowly but didn't move to leave. "However," the speaker continued, "we must now determine appropriate punishment for Zorkath's crimes. His actions led to the deaths of hundreds of innocent medical personnel and wounded soldiers. He attempted to destroy your life and reputation to hide his guilt." The speaker paused, studying Sarah's calm face. "Dr. Chen, as the primary victim of his recent crimes, we would value your input. What punishment do you believe he deserves? The chamber fell silent. Every representative leaned forward, curious. Velthor watched from the gallery, his scales bright with anticipation. Colonel Morrison stood with arms crossed, waiting. Sarah looked at Zorkath for a long moment. The Kralix finally raised his head to meet her gaze. In his eyes, she saw fear, shame, and something else. A desperate hope that maybe, somehow, she would show mercy. I have a story to tell, Sarah said quietly. It happened 2 years ago, during the darkest days of the war. The holographic display activated, showing Sarah's memories from that time. The council watched as the scene unfolded. A field hospital, overwhelmed with casualties. Sarah moved between patients, her hands covered in blood from multiple species. Explosions shook the walls. Supplies were running dangerously low. A critically wounded Kralix officer was brought in, Sarah narrated. He was nearly dead. Massive internal injuries. My staff told me we should focus on patients with better chances of survival. We didn't have enough supplies for everyone. We not fountains. In the memory, medical staff carried in a Kralix on a stretcher. His scales were shattered, his breathing shallow. Sarah approached to examine him. I checked his identification tags, Sarah continued. Military records showed he was a commander. Intelligence reports showed he was responsible for ordering attacks on civilian areas, on hospitals, on places where wounded people lay helpless. The council members stirred uncomfortably. In the memory, Sarah stood frozen, staring at the identification tags. My staff recognized him too, Sarah said. They asked what I wanted to do. It would have been so easy to let him die. To say we didn't have supplies. To prioritize someone else. Anyone else. Young Sarah, in the memory, closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them, her decision was clear. I operated on him for 6 hours, Sarah told the council. I used supplies we desperately needed for other patients. I performed procedures I'd never attempted before because his anatomy was so damaged. 3 times, his heart stopped, and 3 times I brought him back. The memory showed Sarah's exhausted face as she finally stepped away from the operating table. The Kralix officer lived, breathing steadily on life support. He survived, Sarah said. 2 weeks later, he was transferred to a Kralix medical facility. I never saw him again. Quote, she turned to face Zorkath directly. That officer was you, Zorkath. You were the one on my operating table. I saved your life, knowing exactly what you had done, knowing you had ordered the deaths of innocent people, knowing you would probably order more deaths if you recovered. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Zorkath's eyes went wide, his scales rippling with emotion. He stared at Sarah, as if seeing her for the first time. I don't understand, Zorkath whispered. Why? Why would you save someone like me? Sarah's expression was sad but steady. Because I'm a healer, not an executioner. Because even knowing what you'd done, I couldn't stand by and watch you die when I had the skill to save you. That's what being human means to me, choosing compassion even when it's hardest. Especially when it's hardest. She addressed the council again. You ask what punishment Zorkath deserves. In truth, he deserves harsh justice for his crimes. But I think there's a better way. Counselor Mist leaned forward with interest. What do you suggest? Send him to work in the refugee medical camps, Sarah proposed. The camps are full of people displaced by the war humans. Kralix, dozens of species. They need medical support. Let Zorkath spend his days caring for the victims of the kind of violence he once ordered. Let him see the faces of the people who suffer because of war crimes. Let him understand what he truly destroyed. That seems too lenient. A council member objected. Does it? Sarah asked. I think, facing the consequences of his actions every single day. Having to heal the wounds that people like him created might be harder than sitting in a prison cell. Prison lets you hide from what you've done. This won't. She looked at Zorkath again. I saved your life once because I believed in choosing compassion over hatred. Now I'm giving you a chance to understand why that matters. What you do with that chance is up to you. Zorkath's scales shifted through multiple colors: shock, shame, confusion, and finally something that might have been gratitude. Tears formed in his eyes, something rare for Kralix. I don't deserve this mercy, he said hoarsely. No, Sarah agreed. You don't. But mercy isn't about what people deserve. It's about who we choose to be. 6 months had passed since the trial that changed the galaxy's understanding of humanity. Sarah Chen stood at the entrance of the New Hope Medical Complex, the largest interspecies hospital ever built. The morning sun reflected off its glass walls, creating patterns of light that danced across the gathered crowd. Representatives from 40 different species had come for the dedication ceremony. The building behind Sarah represented something revolutionary. A place where any being, regardless of their species or origin, could receive the best medical care available. Dr. Chen, the council speaker called, gesturing for her to approach the podium. As the first chief medical coordinator for the Galactic Peace Corps, would you say a few words? Sarah walked to the podium, her steps confident but humble. She looked out at the sea of faces: humans, Kralix, Vex, and countless others she had once treated in desperate wartime conditions. Thank you all for coming, Sarah began. Her voice carried through the translation devices worn by every attendee. 6 months ago, I stood in a very different place, accused of crimes I didn't commit. Today, I stand here honored beyond anything I imagined possible. But this isn't about me. It's about what we've all chosen to become. She gestured to the hospital behind her. This building represents a promise that we will choose healing over hatred, that we will see patients instead of enemies, that we will use our knowledge to save lives, not to take them. In the crowd, Velthor stood with his family. His scales gleamed with pride. Beside him, wearing the simple uniform of a medical volunteer, stood Zorkath. The former commander had changed dramatically. His once proud bearing had been replaced with quiet humility. His scales bore new scars from his work in the refugee camps, burns from carrying victims from collapsed buildings, cuts from digging through rubble to reach the injured. Sarah's eyes found Zorkath in the crowd. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his presence. 6 months ago, Sarah continued, someone asked me what punishment a war criminal deserved. I chose mercy over vengeance. Some people thought I was being weak. Some thought I was being foolish. But I believe that people can change if given the chance. Zorkath lowered his head, emotion visible in the shifting colors of his scales. Today, that former commander works 18 hours a day in refugee camps, Sarah said. He treats victims of the very kind of violence he once ordered. He saves lives now instead of taking them. He has personally trained over 50 new medical volunteers from various species. Is he redeemed? That's not for me to decide. But he's trying. And sometimes, that's what matters most. Applause rippled through the crowd. Zorkath looked up in surprise, as people around him, former refugees he had helped, patted his shoulders supportively. Colonel Morrison stepped forward next. The retired soldier had dedicated his remaining years to teaching conflict resolution and medical ethics to military officers across the galaxy. Dr. Chen taught us something crucial during the war, Morrison said into the microphone. She taught us that our greatest strength isn't our weapons or our tactics. It's our ability to see the person in our enemy, to recognize suffering, regardless of who experiences it, to choose compassion when hatred would be easier. He pulled out a datapad showing statistics. Since Dr. Chen's trial, medical cooperation between species has increased by 300%. War crime tribunals have adopted new standards based on her testimony. Military academies now require courses in medical ethics that emphasize protecting all wounded, not just your own people. More speakers followed. Each told stories of how Sarah's example had influenced their worlds. A young Kralik student spoke about choosing medicine as a career after hearing about Sarah's work. A human diplomat explained how Sarah's approach to conflict resolution had helped negotiate peace treaties. A Vex merchant described how the new medical stations had saved his entire crew from a plague. Finally, it was time for Sarah to cut the ceremonial ribbon and open the hospital. But before she could, a small group approached from the side entrance. 5 children, 3 human, 2 Kraliks walked forward carrying flowers. They were orphans from the war, now living together in a mixed-species home. The smallest child, a human girl no more than 6 years old, looked up at Sarah with wide eyes. "Miss Doctor," she said shyly, "we made you something." "Miss Doctor, Miss Doctor." She held out a drawing. It showed a simple figure in a white coat standing between different colored stick figures, representing different species. Above them, the child had written in careful letters, "Heroes heal everyone." Sarah knelt down, accepting the drawing with gentle hands. For the first time since the trial began 6 months ago, tears formed in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered to the children. "This means more to me than any medal or title ever could." She stood, holding the drawing carefully, and addressed the crowd one final time. "They called me a war criminal once," Sarah said, her voice strong and clear. "Someone who caused suffering and pain. The truth is, I did cause pain sometimes. Surgery hurts. Setting broken bones hurts. The treatments that save lives aren't always gentle or comfortable." She paused, making sure everyone understood. "But there's a difference between pain that destroys and pain that heals. Between actions that take life and actions that preserve it. That's what humanity offers the galaxy. Not perfection, not superiority, but a stubborn refusal to let hate win. We heal. We persist. We choose life, even when death would be easier." The ribbon was cut. The doors opened. The first patients, a mixture of species who had traveled from across the galaxy, entered the New Hope Medical Complex. As the crowd dispersed, Zorkath approached Sarah hesitantly. They hadn't spoken directly since the trial, though they had worked in the same refugee camps. "Dr. Chen," he said quietly, "I wanted to thank you for saving my life twice, once on that operating table, once in that council chamber." Sarah studied him for a moment. The arrogance was gone. The guilt remained, but it had transformed into purpose. "You're welcome," she replied simply. "Now go save someone else." That's how this works. We save each other, one person at a time, until the whole galaxy learns what peace really means. Zorkath nodded and walked away to join a medical team heading to a disaster zone. Velthor approached next, grinning. "Ready for the celebration dinner? They're serving food from 20 different worlds." Sarah smiled, tucking the child's drawing carefully into her bag. "Yes. But first, let me check on the patients who arrived today. Old habits. Trive. You mean good habits," Velthor corrected. Together, they walked into the hospital. Behind them, the words carved above the entrance caught the fading sunlight. "New Hope Medical Complex, where every life matters." And beneath that, a quote attributed to Dr. Sarah Chen. "They called me a war criminal. I replied by healing their wounds." The legacy of one doctor's choice rippled across the stars, proving that humanity's greatest weapon had always been its heart.